Riders on the storm. Riders on the storm. Into this house we're born.
Hi everyone, welcome to the PowerPoint presentations workshop presented by myself, Kelly Wen.
And Joey Menino.
And Bibiana Osai.
Here we have our table of contents, just a brief overview of what we're going to be discussing in today's workshop. So first, a good presentation. Let's take a look at what aspects make a presentation good or stand out. Next, we'll talk about the presentation structure. We'll look at some of the foundations that make a well-structured presentation. We'll break it down section by section. Next, we'll look at the visual aspects. How can you make your PowerPoint more visually appealing to attract the audience's eye? And lastly, we'll just go over a couple brief general presentation tips just to help your presentation perhaps flow better. So first, what makes a good presentation? Let's break it down. Everyone's probably made some sort of a PowerPoint presentation in the past, but what makes one exactly stand out? Maybe it was the speaker had a crisp and clear voice that really drew your attention and didn't really get distracted most of the presentation. You were really focused. Maybe it just had some eye-catching visuals that helped aid the information. So the text and the pictures really complemented each other. So that really made the presentation stand out for you. Perhaps the presentation just had a good flow to it. The speaker knew the material that they were presenting on very well, and you can clearly tell that when the presentation flow is good. Maybe the presenter just showed a lot of passion. When I think about passion in presentations, I think a lot about TED Talks and some of the presenters that have guests appeared on there. They're usually very knowledgeable in the subject or whatever they're trying to teach, and you can usually tell that by the way that they speak and the mannerisms that they have. Lastly, maybe the presentation just kept the audience's attention the entire time through. The flow was good, the material was adequate, and people didn't really get confused. So maybe the attention was really kept. Next, we're going to talk about the presentation structure. How do you begin to structure your presentation? So first, we have our opening title slide. The main components that all title slides should include, I would say, are the title of the presentation, of course, having the presenters' names, and perhaps some kind of affiliation, whatever group or school that they are associated with. You can include some of these considered components, that is the date of the presentation. I see that more so in business-like presentation styles, so you might want to include a date there. Maybe having some sort of contact information on the slide. However, you can also save the contact information for a later slide on a contacts or questions slide if you want to have that instead. And you might want to include the presenter's title to give some kind of background for the presenter. For instance, maybe for myself, I would say Kelly Wen, PharmD candidate, and then put the year. That would be my title. Here, let's just take a look at a title slide sample. I have here Racobia. Title is nice and bolded. It's the biggest text on the page. And here we have the presenter name, title, affiliation, and some kind of contact information. So it looks very nice, neat, and clean. Next, we are going to take a look into the outline slide. This is usually in objectives or a table of contents, just to give your audience some kind of brief overview about the content you're about to go over. So it provides a visual way to organize your key points so your viewers can understand what to expect and what your focal points are. And it will give them, like I said, what to expect from the presentation and how to interpret the content as well, because usually the table of contents has some sort of flow component to it as well. It also will just summarize the main takeaway points you might want your audience to keep in mind. So in writing your objectives, you may want to include some adjectives or action words from Bloom's taxonomy. Here, Bloom's taxonomy, I see that used a lot for scientific presentations in which you want the audience to take something away. You might want to use these key action words. First, we have create, which basically means to produce new or original work. Evaluate, if you want your audience to justify a stand or decision, or if you want to justify a stand or decision and convey that to the audience. We have analyze, drawing connections among ideas. Apply, which is using information in new situations. Understand, which is explaining ideas or concepts. And remember, if you want them to recall facts and basic concepts you're about to present on. And this was just retrieved from Vanderbilt University. Here we have the 6 main action words broken down into further subwords that you might want to use instead. So instead of saying create, you might want to use generating, planning, or producing. For evaluate, you can say checking or critiquing. Analyze, you can say differentiating, organizing, attributing, and so forth on this page. So next we move on to the introduction slide. So every PowerPoint, I would say, would benefit from having some kind of introduction slide, but it isn't always utilized depending on what you want it to be called. You can name it background information, but it does help because it could introduce a more complex topic, ease into it, so to speak. So it'll give your audience a foundational overview of what you will be covering. It can be a little bit more specific than the table of contents. It usually is. So it is a little bit more thorough in that aspect. And it doesn't need to directly be indicated as an introduction. Like I said, some people title this slide as background. Next, moving forward, we have the content slides, which is really the meat and bones of your presentation. And here are just a few tips and tricks for how you might want to go about. So presenting it in some sort of chronological way that allows the content to build upon one another would help the audience really retain the information and understand the key points you want to discuss. You want to use bullet points to summarize the information instead of long wordy text. That'll just help keep the audience focused and they'll be able to clearly visualize the points you're talking about. And next, you want to aim for perhaps 1 to 2 minutes per slide. Any longer might be maybe too much and it will detract the audience's attention. So 1 to 2 minutes is a good justification per slide. And using tables and graphs to depict more complex information or data. So if you want to summarize a lot of data and big numbers, using that in some kind of table or graph format will help your audience understand it a lot more. So finally, we move on to the conclusion or a summary slide. This will just help the audience basically sum up and synthesize the information you just spoke to them about. And once again, it will highlight key takeaway points that you want the audience to go home with and remember. And you can use the objective slide to guide your contents of the summary slide, but I would say not to repeat the bullets verbatim, word by word, and try to re-summarize, so to speak, the main ideas. Next, we can have a question slide. It's not always included, but it'll allow the audience to clear up anything that may not have been clear in the presentation. And in a way, having a question slide will allow the audience to come up with questions. And if you're able to answer them effectively, that'll show that you've mastered the topic presented. And it improves time management, having the audience hold the questions during the end of the presentation. And for an interactive component, you can ask your audience questions, actually, if you prefer that route instead, to utilize your audience's understanding of the material presented to them. So next, a references and citations page. I would say that's very important, especially for academic presentations, because your professor or your peers might want to know where your information is sourced from. And so just go off of AMA or APA reference style, depending on what your professor is asking for. So AMA or APA is usually for references. Rather, if you are having a works cited slide, that's usually more utilized for Chicago and MLA format. And this should be included at the very end of your presentation in the select formatted style. And a great guide for these different styles is the Purdue OWL website. And just remember to cite images as well. I think it's very important, and a lot of people forget that nowadays. So you can include the references right under images that you may present in your PowerPoint. And you can even consider having footed notes at the bottom corner of your presentation, such as I have an example here, and that could refer to the exact sources used in the slide later in your references.
Hi, I'll be talking about the visual aspects of a PowerPoint. If you've ever wondered how you can make your presentation more organized and visually appealing, this is the section for you. The first thing you're going to want to consider is the theme of your PowerPoint. You're going to want to make sure you find a template that suits the presentation needs, and you're going to want to try to avoid the default or preset PowerPoint or Google Slides themes. And this is mostly because these are themes that everyone has really seen before, and it's a great way to keep your audience engaged and focused is to find a theme that they might not have seen before and is eye-catching and interesting to look at. One thing to consider when you're looking for your theme is to limit it to 3 main colors and the use of a white background. This is mostly for accessibility reasons. You're going to want to try to avoid red and green backgrounds. You'll see here in our theme, we've got a nice white kind of beige background with yellow, orange, and brown. And for academic presentations, if you're doing this for school, another important thing to consider is following the rubric guidelines that are provided by professors. These are always very important to follow. Another important tool in PowerPoints is something called Slide Master. And what this is it's a feature that allows you to customize fonts and different formatting features throughout the entire presentation all at once. What you do is you can either, depending on which program you're using, you'll always click on View, but then you'll either find Slide Master right away, or you'll have to click on Master and then Slide Master. But it'll come up with a page where you can see all the slides at once, and when you change the font, it'll change the font on all the slides all at once. And the same thing goes for other formatting features. This feature is really helpful because it allows you to achieve a consistent and simple design template, whether it be your font or other formatting features. You can make sure that every slide benefits from any of the changes you make. And when it comes to templates, if you're not sure where to look to find new innovative templates, these are a couple of resources that provide templates for free. We have Slides Go, Slides Carnival, and Visme. All of them provide free PowerPoint templates for you to use. Another important visual aspect to consider is your use of fonts. You might be used to using Times New Roman for essays, but you're going to actually want to avoid serif fonts like Times New Roman, and you're going to want to use a single sans serif font like Arial or Helvetica. The reason for this is that Times New Roman or Palatino can be difficult to read on slides, so Arial or Helvetica are much easier to read. You can also consider using different colors, sizes, and styles for impact. You'll see that Arial, Helvetica, Times New Roman, and Palatino are all bolded here. You can do this with thematic topics or buzzwords, vocab words that you're using in your PowerPoint, and it makes them stand out. It kind of creates a fresh, interesting looking slide. You also want to make sure you're limiting punctuation marks and using a consistent font throughout your entire presentation. Another important thing that makes every slide interesting is pictures. This is something that enhances presentations because it provides a visual reference for what you are trying to convey in words. But when you're looking for pictures to use in your PowerPoint, you are going to want to avoid using clip art. Non-clip art images help give your PowerPoint a clean and professional look. You also want to avoid overusing images, and you want to try to find simple images, but you want to find images that are relevant to what you're talking about and give something for the audience to look at while you discuss whatever your topic is that you are discussing. And always make sure that you credit the source of your images, like Kelly said earlier. It's very important. This is a website called Unsplash. They provide high resolution photos that can be downloaded and used for free. These can be used for commercial or non-commercial purposes. No permission needed. Great website if you're looking for some stock images. You can see they've got the puppy on the left and kind of a beach on the right. They've got a lot of variety of images on the website, so it's a great resource. Another visual component to some PowerPoints are tables and graphs. This is probably more commonly seen in scientific research, any kind of research really, you'll see tables and graphs. They are a great way to depict numerical and categorical data. They help simplify more complex and difficult information. Instead of writing out data and results, if the audience can see it in a table or graph, that's much easier to understand. That's mostly because they're simple, usually in their design and format. But you're going to want to avoid using too much text on tables or graphs and keep it very simple so that the audience can easily understand. Here is an example of a table you might see in a PowerPoint. You can see that it's simply designed. We've got the left column, it's in a different color, and then we've got the right column that summarizes complex information in a fairly concise way. And this was a clinical trial summary for Rukobia. Lastly, an important visual aspect to consider using in your PowerPoints are transitions and animations. The difference between transitions and animations is that transitions are the movement from slide to slide, whereas animations are specific movement from text in a single slide. If you have a lot of information or a lot of bullet points coming on one slide, you can have the information come in bullet point by bullet point. That would be animations. And transitions are nice kind of fade in, fade out between slides or swipes or things like that. But you want to stick to using the subtle transitions and animations to keep it professional and avoid using some of the more dramatic ones. You can see we have some examples of transitions and animations you might use. Fade, push, wipe. These are all great transitions, and dissolve in, fade, and float in are some animations you might use.
Hi, so I'm going to be talking about some of the tips that you can use during your presentation. You just need to keep it at the back of your mind. It will help you during the preparation of your PowerPoint slides as well as the main presentation of your work. Now, the first tip you need to take note of is plan carefully and do your research. Now, when you've been given your assigned topic, it is important that you do a research in order to have an understanding of what the topic is, as well as to get the right information that you would be sharing with your audience. Now, in doing your research or, during the creation process of your PowerPoint slides, it is important that you know who your audience is, so that you can tailor every aspect and the overall presentation of PowerPoint slides to your audience. First, your audience might be people who are well versed with the topic you're talking about, or they might be people who do not have a foundational understanding of the topic that you are talking about. So it is important that you understand who your audience is so that you would know what information to include and how to go about your PowerPoint slides. And in relation to this, if your audience, is someone who is not well versed with the topic you're talking about, an introduction slide, like Kelly mentioned previously, is something that would be useful because it would help give a brief overview at the start of your presentation, and it will help ease your audience into the rest of your PowerPoint presentation. Now, during your presentation, it is important that you speak comfortably and clearly to your audience, as this will help them understand what information you're saying. It is important that you take pauses in between whatever information you're saying so that they can digest it as well as process what has already been given to them. Now, when you're done creating the various slides that you need for your presentation, it is important that you check for spelling and grammatical errors, because when you make a mistake, so when it appears different from what you say, it would create some sort of misunderstanding in your audience, or it could distort the information that you are trying to pass across to your audience. Another important tip to take note of is you not reading directly from the slides. Now, generally, the slides just serve as a cue or as a guide to what you want to pass across to your audience. So after you probably share what is on the slide, it is important that you go ahead to elaborate on that information. You explain whatever information is already listed or mentioned on the slide. Another tip is to avoid text-heavy slides. As you would see in the slides that we just created and the slides that we are currently sharing with you, we have more of bullet points than paragraphs or long sentences. And this is important because you don't want your audience to be distracted from what you are saying verbatim, but you just want to use the slide to kind of guide them and to highlight, the things that you would be talking about. And then using pictures or tables or graphs as an aid is actually important, especially for complex topics. It is also used to show the pattern of relationships between information that you are sharing, especially when it comes like accounting, or it has to do with census, or change in statistical data. You can use tables and graphs to show that. And pictures can also be used as a way to attract or to engage your audience with your PowerPoint slides or PowerPoint presentation. And then another thing to take note of is if you are using animations or transitions, you should keep it simple. Some of the animations or transitions that we use are the toggle or just the slide in. It is important that you don't use a lot of complex transitions, because then it distracts your audience from the main issues of your presentation. And then providing a copy for your audience is actually optional. It depends on who the organizer of the presentation is. Sometimes your professor might ask you to share a copy of the PowerPoint presentation with your audience or with your colleagues. And sometimes when you attend a conference and you're having a presentation, you might have to use a projector instead to share your PowerPoint slide with the audience. So it might not be necessary for you to share or to provide a copy for your audience. So you have to inquire from the organizer of the presentation to know whether or not you should share a copy of your PowerPoint presentation with your audience. And then timing your presentation. So before the presentation day, it is important that you time yourself so you don't go beyond the time allocated to you. Also, generally, for most presentations, the professor or the organizer of the presentation would tell you how many minutes or how many hours you have for that presentation. So it is important that you time yourself and you work within the time allocated to you. And last but not the least is practice. Practice makes perfect. You have to practice as many times as you can. You can practice in front of your friends, or you can, practice in front of the mirror so that you know how to address certain slides or how to eye contact with your audience, because eye contact is very important. It helps you engage with your audience and to keep your audience engaged with your work. So the bottom line of everything that we've said, Joey, and Kelly, is just that PowerPoints are a great way to help you present information. And we hope that, with a few points and a few tips that we've shared with you, that your PowerPoint presentation will improve. Thank you.
And here are the references that we use to produce this PowerPoint. Lastly, these are the credits.
Riders on the storm, riders on the storm, into this house we're